Hey everyone, welcome back to my series that I started on the channel called Breaking Down the Soundtrack. The series where I take an in-depth look into the soundtrack of your favorite game, analyze the music, and asks the important questions. This series is aimed to help you understand why soundtracks sound the way they do and some core aspects to them. This series is also a light understanding of how music for game soundtracks works, so if you ever want to start writing, this may help you. This is the first sequel to a prior video in the Breaking Down the Soundtrack series. Today, we are diving back into the world of Subnautica, but the water might be a bit colder than you might remember. That's because we are looking at the soundtrack of Subnautica Below Zero. Now, no more fooling around, let's jump right into this episode. Before we examine the soundtrack, let's quickly go over the game. Subnautica Below Zero is a sequel to the original Subnautica game. Released originally in January 2019, Subnautica Below Zero was released into early access mode, meaning players could start playing and testing the game before it was officially released. Created by Unknown Worlds Entertainment, Subnautica Below Zero follows pretty closely behind what the first game was generically. Below Zero is an underwater open-world survival game filled with lush environments and lots of fish. Much like the original game, there's always something hiding in the shadows just beneath. Where Below Zero varies from the original Subnautica is now there is more land to traverse in the game, with an entire section of the game taking place on an ice shelf, and brand new environments and threats. With the regular hunger, thirst, health, and oxygen necessities, now you as the player have to worry about freezing to death and dying of hypothermia on top of it all. Now that we have a general look at the game, we can take a look at the soundtrack. Composed by Ben Prunty, Subnautica Below Zero has a lot of iconic sounds and defining traits. Prunty has a very unique style, and he approached Subnautica in an incredibly fascinating way. The soundtrack uses a lot of bells, vocal samples, kalimbas, and arpeggiated synths. These sounds together make a total of 54 tracks and about 2.5 hours of music. Much like the previous game, there are a variety of genres, such as melodic, ambient, dark or horror ambient, and jukebox. Let's hear some of these examples of what these tracks sound like. Before we jump into the jukebox tracks, I want to mention only one of these was written by Ben Prunty himself. The rest of the jukebox tracks are owned by various artists and not actually part of the soundtrack.
Yeah, I know I'm far from home, but I'll survive. I'm jumping right into the dance, just hold my breath, not going without a fight. I'm diving in too deep, an ocean in my head. It's getting hard to see. I might be lost, but I'm gonna find who I am. Diving in too deep. Don't have a master plan. It's getting hard to breathe. I might be lost, but I'm gonna find who I am. Diving in too deep.
Now that we've heard what each category sounds like, let's discuss exactly what we are hearing. The soundtrack itself can be very orchestral sometimes, and invoke stunning feelings of wonder and awe while traversing the biomes. Other times, it can make you feel very unsettled and afraid. Prunty definitely has a noteworthy resume, including games such as FTL Faster Than Light, Into the Breach, Photographs, Darkside Detective 1, and many more, so he is no stranger to the video games industry and, to be more specific, video game composition. With all this in mind, now it's time to break down a track from the actual soundtrack itself. The track I chose is a fan favorite titled Lily Pads. Played when entering the Lily Pads biome, this soothing track starts with a kalimba playing the main melody by itself. From here, it transitions into a different instrument playing the second melody, followed by an arpeggiated bell sequence. The main melody is played again, but on a different synth, into another arpeggiated bell sequence, but this time with percussion. And I want to emphasize the percussion because after analyzing both the entire soundtrack and Prunty's previous projects, his percussion is very iconic to his style. It's very glitchy and complex with its beats. And we get to hear that in all the percussion that goes on, both in this bell sequence and the following segment, with an added synth bringing a new melody in. To wrap this up, the first melody is played again, then layered with the second one. Now is the part of the video where we start asking questions about the soundtrack. The first and major one being, does it help the game and make it better? I would say this game would definitely not be the same without the music it has in it currently. The electronic orchestral style of Prunty's work fits the game beautifully, and without it, the game would probably fall very flat. The next question is it better than the first game's soundtrack? This is definitely a hard question to answer and will vary based on person, but personally, I like Below Zero's music a bit better than the originals, but let me explain why. Going back to play through Subnautica before Below Zero's release, I couldn't help but notice that when swimming through around 5 of the biomes, there were always 5 different tracks that were just constantly swapping in and out, and most of the time, it was always such a messy transition into the next. Some would even overlap. Where Below Zero differs is that every biome has its own distinguished track, and a lot more of the cinematic moments are also scored customly, rather than having tracks fit broadly into the game. Prunty and Trelinsky have very different styles of writing though, so it's not really fair to be comparing both the soundtracks in the first place. Both soundtracks are amazing, but I find myself listening to the Below Zero album more than the original. And that just about wraps up our time for this episode of breaking down the soundtrack. If you guys like this episode, please do leave a like on it so I know that you guys want to see more of this series. Also, do let me know down below what video game soundtrack you would like me to cover next. Anything else important will be linked down below. That's all for today. I'm Time Traveler, signing off. Bye-bye!